Hello, everyone out there. Welcome to another session with myself, Meredith McCarthy, and Theresa Saunders, who is a fellow colleague of mine. She is full of information, and we're going to be discussing parts. So if no one has heard about parts, or maybe some of you have heard about parts, we just want to quickly go over a bit of history and how we apply parts to hypnotherapy in the process and why we might do that actually with a client. So how are you today, Theresa?
I'm good, thank you, Meredith, and thanks for inviting me along again this week. We look forward to our weekly talk time chats.
So when we're kind of looking at the history, Sigmund Freud, he was a funny fella, and there were some cornerstones, I guess, of understanding that started to spark interest in looking at how things work in the modern way that we do now. So I just want to kind of honor a couple of people in this history of where parts even came from. So just looking at Freud and the roots of part therapy, Sigmund Freud, he used a model of the psyche, which divided into three parts: the id, the ego, and the superego. So Freud's work laid out the foundation for understanding the mind as composed of different elements that interact and influence our behavior. Then we have the ego state therapy in mid-20th century. We have Dr. John G. Watkins developed the ego state therapy, which focused on identifying and working with distinct parts of the self known as ego states. This approach emphasized that the individual has multiple aspects of their personality, each with its own memories, behaviors, and emotions, which is quite interesting, when you're thinking about how you remember something versus how you then might behave about something. Quite often, we don't always behave like we thought we behaved. Isn't that true? Sometimes we have a funny memory of how it was.
Yes, and I guess our ego as such then takes preference over that to how we remember it, and also trauma can have a significant impact on how we remember things.
Hmm. So we tend to distort, delete, and generalize information. And I think sometimes too, there's a part of us that wants to protect from feeling hurt, or maybe even owning something that we feel embarrassed about. So some people can move into denial. But yeah, it can be interesting how the brain reacts to trauma and how the brain reacts to its environment, eh?
It can be, and our ego states are quite different. I think it's about seven that they say that types of ego state that we can actually have. The selfish part of us, the pleaser part of us, the rebellious bit, critical thinking, enabler.
Mm. So there's also a belief that as we grow, we begin to give birth to different ego states or ego parts, if you like. And there was an analogy that I heard about, and it's the house analogy, where you've got the basement, you've got the attic, and you've got the main house. And depending on what's happening that comes to the front door will depend on which ego state will open the door and deal with it. And some of the parts will never come out of the basement, and some of them will never come down from the attic. But every so often they might, you never know. And it depends on the stimuli that that person needs to deal with. So when we're thinking about therapy, this is something to consider when we're working with clients. I'll just continue a little bit about the I guess, stepping stones of the history of parts, so people can understand what happened next. So Charles Tibbets is a prominent figure in the field of hypnotherapy. He further advanced the concept of parts therapy. He introduced the idea of that the part has a positive intention, even if the behavior is problematic. Tibbet's work emphasized the importance of integrating and harmonizing these parts for overall mental health. So if we think about our subconscious mind wants to protect you. So let's give that idea to a part of us that's trying to do something for us, but it may look like it's not being helpful, but in its opinion, that part probably thinks it's doing a marvelous job. And that's where it can become a little bit problematic. Can you think of a situation that maybe a client might present with a behavior that they might want to change, that parts therapy could be potentially really useful for?
Could be a fear of dogs, a phobia of dogs, because at one point in their lifetime they were actually bitten or scared by a dog.
Yeah. So what might their behavior have become as an adult?
Would be fearful because you would the part of you would remember the time when you were bitten and it was hurt and you were afraid and scared and your body wanted to protect you at that time. But as you've grown and become an adult, you know that that's not necessarily a rational form of thinking and that there are things that you can change.
Yeah, and it may even influence the way the person behaves in an area where a dog is, where the dog will sense its fear and it will actually try to dominate the human, where, you know, they'll actually run after the person that's most scared of the dog. It's a very interesting thing. So to run away from that, which will be instinctive to do, may not actually always be the best answer either, because then you're submitting. You're kind of looking like it's all fun and it's all on and that dog's going to chase you.
That's right. I mean, but at that time, that part of you was actually protecting you. I do believe our body wants to either protect us or please us, and that is a form of, a basis that forms a lot of our ways of reacting, our thoughts and emotions that carry through from that.
Absolutely. So hopping back into a bit of history here. So Virginia Satir and family systems theory was around 1970s, I believe. Yeah.
I think it was 70s or 80s, yes.
So she was a renowned family therapist, contributed to the development of parts therapy through her work on family systems therapy. She proposed that the human mind functions in a similar way to a family, with different parts interacting, sometimes conflicting. Her approach highlighted the need for communication and cooperation amongst these parts, which is a big part of what we do as a therapist. We get that part to have a voice, and we get the other parts to talk to that part and come up with some understandings, and then maybe a new contract, a new way of being that's going to serve all the parts. So that's a big part of how we work as hypnotherapists, eh?
Yes, yeah, and acknowledging that part for what it actually has done in the past, even if it's not being useful at the moment.
Absolutely. So then we move into Richard Swartz, and he developed the internal family system, IFS for short. So that was in the 1980s, and Dr. Richard Swartz developed that, which was a major influence in the way that we do parts therapy. So when we're kind of looking at the idea of utilizing these understandings in modern therapy, I think it's changed how people use talk therapy actually. So instead of just talking it out from one perspective, they recognize that actually we could give that part a voice, a space and a place, and actually bring it into therapy as part of that resolution process, eh?
And I think by actually acknowledging that there are different parts of us that make up the way that we react or behave, it gives us also an understanding, more of an understanding of why that happens. Because, for example, if there's a part of us that wants to lose weight, part of us knows that that's a healthy thing to do, that perhaps to be losing weight, but another part of us thinks that eating or gains from eating because it's comfort to them and it's a way that you find comfort.
Mm.
So I think it gives us an understanding.
Yeah, yeah. So when we're kind of looking at Swartz, and he introduced that concept of the self, a central compassionate presence that could help mediate and help heal the interactions between the parts. So that's a fundamental understanding. So when we're kind of looking at the idea of how we apply this, um, when we're looking at parts therapy, I might come across someone who is stuck and they know that that is not what they want for themselves, but they're unable to move from that position for whatever reason. So that might call me as a therapist to potentially use parts as a process. So when we're thinking about hypnosis, how do we set it up? So we're taking them into hypnosis, and we might invite them to think about that part that feels scared of change. And if that part could have a voice today, what might it say? Now you ask it as a general question, and the client will either come up with that, and it will start to flow and start to help to generate that part's perspective. And each time you invite the different part to come and play, we need to be very careful about giving it a label of sorts so we can refer to that part properly later. Otherwise, the therapy can get very, very confusing because you might have 6 different parts or more talking amongst each other. So as a therapist, you really do need to set it up quite well. What are your thoughts on that, Theresa?
Yes, I have sort of come to that point where there has been several parts. So I invite my clients to name them when they call that thing, that part forward. I invite them to actually name them. And sometimes they also like to give them a color along with that name, because they might have little, I don't know, little Pete and big Pete or something like that as well. So I just allow them to clarify themselves of how they see that part. Sometimes they even describe what that part looks like to
Mm.
them through their eyes.
Absolutely. So when we're looking at the little self and the future self and the you that you are now, they are 3 different parts that you might be dealing with. And that's often used in regression and also in future pacing. So you're getting that client to imagine that part has resolved everything and now you're thriving. What does that look like? And what's changed, and you can get the client to really describe that out loud or just imagine that within their mind and acknowledge the changes and shifts that might have occurred. When there's conflict, though, that's where the parts really comes into its own, I believe, because it's around getting that part to understand what the other parts need and recognizing that maybe the way that part was running the program, they may have outgrown, or it may not be functional anymore. So you invite that part potentially to see whether it could take on board a new role that could help the other parts. Are they open to that, to create harmony? And most of the time, of course, those parts do want to resolve things because they want to do well for that person. What are your thoughts on that, Theresa?
Yeah, yes. I definitely agree with what you're saying there, Meredith, and I think this is where it's wonderful as therapists that we can become curious and we
Mm.
can invite our clients to actually play and just tease it and go along with what they're feeling. And if they're not ready to play at that stage, engage them to play.
Mm.
Because often as adults, especially, we don't play anymore. We're very serious. We've got serious hats on. And with being that curious part and teasing their curiosity in themselves, they're going to get deeper to that root cause
Mm.
potentially of what's going on in their life and holding them back.
Mm. I had a wonderful demonstration done in front of me at one of the conferences, hypnotherapy conferences many years ago, and it stuck in my mind and it changed my practice forever, actually. We recently had the guy who came and talked to us. Roy Hunter, yes. And so he completely changed the way I worked with parts, and he used a Gestalt kind of understanding where, and I'll talk you guys through it because I think it's quite beautiful actually how he worked with that many years ago. He simply said, okay, if fear had a shape, what shape would it form? And the person would form the shape. And he said, okay, if you could touch it, how would it feel to touch? And if you could look right around it, would it be the same on all directions? And how heavy or light is it? And if it had a name, what name would it be? And how old is it? Is it old or young, or, you know? So you're allowing the client to really take that part and cause it to become a thing that it can start to talk to. Now, it's like an empty chair exercise. So you can imagine that that part could sit in the chair opposite you, as if that part was a real part. Now, you get the person then to float out of their body and into that part and look back at, let's, for the sake of it, Kim. We'll call the client Kim. And I might ask the part, now, Kim has described you, but could you describe Kim today? How do you see Kim from your perspective? And it is incredible how that client is able to hop into that part and give it a voice. And the perspective that happens, I had one woman, she came in and she called her part Mouse. And every time she hopped into Mouse and gave Mouse a voice, and she would become squeaky like a mouse. And it was just magical. And once you set it up and the client knows they can hop out of that part and back into themselves and then talk to that, the two parts start to talk to one another. And there's this deep level of understanding that goes on, and you literally leave the client to it. And once they've resolved it, it's done. But right after that, when you reorientate the client, you're not to talk about it. You just let the client journey into the end of the session without having to the nth degree, describe everything that happened or why it happened or psychoanalyze anything. You let the part then integrate whatever understanding that is in their own gentle time. And that's magical. Have you ever seen that in process, Theresa, that particular style?
Yes, I have, and I've had clients behave in a similar mannerism as you have just described. I mean, I just really enjoy parts. I think it's amazing. It never ceases to amaze me, should I say, really, each time that it happens and how people react and what they describe and what comes to light. It's quite magical.
Yeah. Obviously, there's more detail, which I do train and teach people how to do the part successfully. I'm just keeping it short for this podcast, and for those that may find it a little bit overwhelming, because it is quite a leap of faith to do parts work, I think, and work with a client in that way. But it's so rewarding for not only that client, but for you as a practitioner to see how incredible the subconscious is and how it can work out stuff. And each part, you know, when you give it permission to have a voice and have a say and feel understood, things change. Perspective is enlightening, really, isn't it? Yeah. So when we're looking at reasons why you might use parts. What are some other reasons why you might choose to use parts? Are there any other things that come to
Yeah.
mind?
For self-improvement, for enhancing your confidence or motivation, your
Mm.
past traumas, I think it's really good. And PTSD
Mm.
as well. Yeah.
On that note, I think it's important to say we're not there to re-traumatize a client.
Mm.
We're there to empower a client to allow that part that may have had trauma have a say, you know?
And yeah, and like your parts, you can also use it to enhance your creativity and problem solving. So it doesn't always have to be traumatic things that you're working on.
Mm.
It can just, yeah, be for self-improvement and empowering.
Absolutely. Yeah. So when we're kind of looking at, I guess, how you would set up parts, have you got any kind of tips or things that you do that help journey a client into that process?
Um, Depending on the client, sometimes I don't always, and this is a controversial one in some ways, I don't always let them know that we're going to talk to parts because I might not know at the actual beginning that we're going to do parts therapy.
Mm.
Um, if somebody's particularly asked for that, then I'll explain sort of that we might call a part forwards and they're going to talk to that part. But I would take them into a hypnosis state, and then I would, if they've given me a specific thing that they want to actually work on, then I'll ask them to get that part to step forward.
Mm.
Or it might generally be like, is there a part of you that would like to speak now to let us know what you're worried about or concerned about, and invite that part to talk,
Mm.
and then progress forward from that as if, if there's another part that, so what's stopping you, or is there another part of you that you'd actually like to come out and have a discussion now? So it's difficult to explain exactly what you do because it changes with every client. It moves, it revolves.
Absolutely. And I think it's being ready for it and utilizing it well.
Mm.
What sprung to mind while you were talking is people who want to give up an addiction. And quite often at the end, you might have done all this wonderful work, but just as a double check, you can say, now, is there any part of you that's not ready to change today? And you could use the ideomotor signals. And if they say yes, then you go, okay, can I invite that part to have a voice today? Is that okay? And the ideomotor signal says yes. And then you say, okay, well, can that part step forward and identify itself? What's your name? And what's your job? Okay. So how do you help Kim when she's in that situation where she thinks she needs a cigarette? So what's your job? Okay. And so as you unpack and get clarity on what that part does and why that part's scared of change, then you can really assist the client to share a new understanding with that part in a way that that part can take it on board. Because yeah, it's important that the client be part of it. It's not about the therapist hopping in and talking to that part. It's about the client talking to their part.
Mm. And I
So
have to, sorry.
that's a fine line between guiding and inviting that part to have a voice and then leaving the Kim, for example, the client, to talk to her very own part in her very own way and come up with whatever needs to happen next. You're just facilitating. Yeah. You were going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to sort of say, apart from just from us asking, instigating these questions of what would you like to, what are you worried? Is there anything you're worried about that Kim would do if you're not there, and then allow them to speak, and then perhaps then you get Kim to reassure them, or tell them that's not the case in their own words. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, asking that part, what do you need to feel safe? Or what do you need that's going to help you to work with the other parts so Kim can progress and let go of smoking forever, whatever that is. So you're inviting that part to identify what it is that they need. And then, of course, the client can talk to that. So that's always important to get that clarity. Otherwise, you might miss an opportunity to really allow all parts to work nicely together for that, promoting that change.
And is there another part of you that could help ease this transition?
Absolutely. Yeah. What is lovely is that you can keep on checking, is there any other parts? And they might have been hiding. So don't just think there's only one part that's in the way. There might be another one straggling. So until they're all gone, you haven't done your work. So to do that, it might take quite a big chunk of your session time. So you need to be careful and timely about that. Now, that's where we might run into problems where, let's say we have come to the end of that session and we're only halfway through a process. It's okay, because then you can ask permission. Look, is it okay now that we've run out of time today to come back to this next week? Is that okay with you? Yes. Is that okay with you? Yes. Okay. So with that in mind, let's acknowledge how far we've come today. And then you reorientate the client, knowing that they can reconnect to that and continue journeying and working with that. Because it may be quite layered, that person comes with quite a complex history, and a lot of layers might be there, and it might take quite a bit to untangle those layers. So it's okay to chunk it down into different sessions and work with those same parts again and again to create the ultimate resolution. What are your thoughts on that? Because, timing is sometimes precious. So where you might have a mother who has to pick up her children from school and they can't go over time.
That's right. And I think as long as you are mindful of that and you're safe in your practice, and you don't just leave them in the middle of something that you're working with, and you sort of ask their permission to come back and you close it nicely, that next week you'll carry on, that's fine to do. Because if it is complex, we're here for our client. We want our client to do things in their time for it to work for them. It's not about pushing them out the door in that 1 hour, hour and a half time frame. It's about what our client needs. And some people actually need a little bit longer to process things than others do. And, if it takes that length of time, that's okay.
Some of my biggest shifts have been using the parts therapy. However, in the first session with someone, if you haven't quite gained their trust and rapport, you might come up with some challenges using parts. So you do need to make sure that you have a level of commitment and trust where the client's relaxed enough in your space to be able to give that part a voice and work with you in that way. Because it is quite vulnerable, because this is a part that maybe has never come out to the surface before.
And if you haven't got that rapport with your client, like it's a new client, first session, they might not feel comfortable thinking that they've got all these different parts of them and inviting them out to talk to you, because just the fact that they've got all these different parts that have different thoughts could be completely new to their way of thinking.
And it's not getting it, I guess, mixed up with multiple personality disorder either. So
Yeah.
it's how are you normalizing that if you didn't have a chance to introduce the concept of parts? How do you normalize that after the session so the client doesn't feel like they might be, suffering from multiple personalities? Because people read stuff and they come up with strange conclusions about what they are and who they are and, how they run. So as a practitioner, I think we need to be thoughtful about holding space gently and kindly and thoughtfully about how we end the session, how we allow that person to feel happy about the work that has happened, even if it hasn't fully come to a full conclusion. So the person feels safe enough to come back again and work with it.
And you're saying about that, Meredith, about the person not coming to a full conclusion of it, you will probably notice that your client will still have noticed a form of positive shift during that session anyway, and they'll acknowledge that to you in some way before they leave or when they come back at the next session.
Yeah. It's amazing how quick, once that part is identified and you start working with it and you come to a resolution, how everything changes for that client to the better. And they will take maybe 1 to 3 days to process a session like that, because it's a dramatic shift. Yeah, so we're talking about really entrenched stuckness or ideas or beliefs that may not be serving the client, that suddenly they have to recalibrate, and it takes a bit. They have to reshift the way that they view things, the way that they view themselves, and how they conduct themselves as they move forward. Yeah. Cool.
Years of conflict and inner turmoil can
Yeah,
just completely change the way now you view your life and the world around you.
absolutely. Yeah. So is there anything else you would like to add to today's discussion for the students to perhaps understand?
I think I would like to just direct them to your website, and if they want to know more about parts, or if they would like to train with you at the school, then please, like, subscribe, share, join up, enroll in one of Meredith's classes. Meredith has been actually a hypnotherapist for over 30 years. She not only has been a hypnotherapist, but because she's in that field of hypnotherapy for so long and has the experience, she is a really good person to actually learn from, because she's been there, she's walked the talk. I'd really recommend having a trainer that's been seasoned for many years and seen many people come and go, and yet she's still here ready to teach and pass the knowledge on to others. And I think you'd find it an invaluable experience.
Thank you. That was kind. Yeah, I'm passionate about teaching people what I know. I want to leave a good legacy behind, and really drill down into the nitty-gritty of what I've learned on the ground. And yeah, if you're ready to train as a clinical hypnotherapist, we definitely have an amazing diploma course. It's available online. So please, visit the website www.nzach.ac.nz. We will have the link below in the YouTube video. But look, feel free to connect with me too. I do discovery calls, so if you want to have a little chat about your particular situation and interest, I'm happy to answer any questions. On that note, if you have any topics that you would like us to talk about, please, drop us a line. We would love to be able to talk about all sorts of different things on this channel. And weekly, we're back here with different topics each week. So there's plenty of opportunity to talk on something that you might want to hear more about. But on that note, thank you very much again for your time and presence and knowledge, Theresa. And thank you very much, everyone out there, for tuning in to this week's discussion. So join us again another week of Talk Time. We discuss everything to do with hypnosis. Bye.
Thank you, Meredith. Bye.